Everyone. Thank you for sticking around in this last session. That was a very long introduction, so I'm a lead learning designer at Busuu. That's a language learning application. And I'm going to tell you a little bit more about a research project I've been involved in at Busuu, which is about how users perceive their experiences with mobile language apps, and more specifically, how they perceive that they can train their speaking skills when they learn a language. Okay, yes, it's moving, perfect. So on the agenda, I will quickly, in the beginning, talk a little bit more about Cal and Mal. I will explain what that is in a minute. And then I will dive deeper into my research project. So I will talk a little bit about Busuu, about what we do, methodology used, and the data analysis that went into this project. Then in the end, I will also look towards the future, because there is such a thing that's called AI. I don't know if you know or heard about it, that is also mixing up our field rapidly. So let's get started with call. So I go back to the second half of the 20th century. And what is call? Call is computer-assisted language learning. So in the second half of the 20th century, computers looked like this, sort of. So it's initially a tool that was very costly and mostly only available to institutions. So it was not the way we know it today. Moving on towards to the early 2000s, I had one like this, or my parents had one like this at home. So we had a personal computer, or not everyone, but it became a thing in families and in schools as well. And it was also the early 2000s that saw the first complete web-based language course. Fast forward to 2024, computer-assisted language learning is available and affordable to individuals all over the world. And of course, the COVID pandemic has obviously accelerated this evolution, as, for example, Christoph also mentioned in his presentation earlier. Now, this was computer-assisted language learning. But in the beginning of the 21st century, there was a rise in MAL, which is mobile-assisted language learning. So mobiles started to become available, and it was also a way to offer students access to the internet, ubiquity to learning as well. So there is not one definition of MAL. It is a field that it has been studied quite broadly, but not as much as call. So it's still a fairly new phenomenon. But something that comes back in a lot of definitions is that it's portable, personal, informal, and that a student can learn anywhere and anytime. So it's in a way also more accessible learning. And it's very different from traditional classroom learning, of course. Now, mobile language learning applications. So I've got some numbers. They're a little bit outdated, but they're still very interesting, because in 2012, for example, there were already 20,000 educational apps available in the App Store. Of course, this has been exponential. This has grown exponentially because of the pandemic. In the iOS App Store in 2022, the keywords language learning gave more than 150 search results. There are different kinds of apps out there, and I think all of you know some of the very famous ones. So there are apps focusing on one language, others on multiple languages. Most of those teach English, by the way. So English is by far the most famous or popular language to learn. And many apps focus on one skill only. So reading, listening, speaking, but very often also just vocabulary acquisition and grammar practice. Now, I was interested in speaking skills in MAL, because, to be fair, before I started working at Busuu, I've been a teacher for many, many years. I was kind of skeptical about whether you could actually practice your speaking skills or improve your speaking skills with a mobile application. And if we dive into investigation done on mobile-assisted language learning, we see that most apps don't focus on speaking. So it's mostly vocabulary acquisition. Speaking is only 8%. Again, this was a study from 2012, but it's not very different now in 2024. And so most apps focus on receptive skills. So that means reading and listening. And they don't focus on productive skills like speaking and writing. And they present more form-focused language formation. And there are very few instances of speaking out there. So it's difficult to see the woods, the forest for the trees, because there are so many apps out there. So, and a lot of people, as I said myself as well, were kind of skeptical about studying on your phone with an application. So that is why this topic and this research project arose, because we wanted to investigate how our students, the people that are using our application, actually feel about using it to practice their speaking skills. So that brings me to my research objectives. So how do they feel about learning with a mobile application? And more specifically, how do they perceive practicing their speaking skills with a mobile application? And how is their motivation? So what is their motivation? What do they think about using it? And that made me formulate the following 3 research questions. So how helpful do they find speaking activities in mobile apps? How much do they enjoy speaking activities in mobile apps? And is there a significant difference between different kinds of speaking activities? Because as you will see in a minute, there are different ways you can practice speaking on a mobile app. In this case, Busuu. Why Busuu? Because I work for Busuu. So Busuu is, for those who don't know it, it's a language learning app where you can learn 14 languages from A1 level, so beginner level, up to B2 level, which is high intermediate. And we teach, and I say teach because there is actually a team of teachers and learning designers behind it. We teach different kind of skills. So we include the 4 skills: listening, reading, writing, and speaking. And we do speaking, or we practice speaking, with 3 different activities. So we have the first one, it's maybe the most famous one that you will see in different kind of application, and that is a speech recognition exercise. So how does it work? You say the sentence, and the app will tell you whether it's correct or incorrect. It's used mostly to practice pronunciation, and the app will tell you whether it's correct or incorrect because it uses voice recognition software. So that's the first exercise. The second exercise is a conversation exercise, and this is where learners see a question. For example, in this case, it says, "Hi, how are you? Can you please respond to that question?" Users can then submit a spoken or a written contribution they can choose, and the submission is then sent to the community. Now, who's the community? The community are people who signed up, who speak the language that you are learning. For example, I speak Dutch, and I learn Japanese. So there will then be Japanese speakers. There will be Dutch speakers correcting the Japanese, and Japanese speakers correcting the Japanese. So there is a kind of an interaction between those 2 groups. Which brings me to the third speaking activity, because it is the community correction. So when you send your submission, your spoken submission to the community will receive it and will correct it for you. They can also do that by leaving you a voice message or by writing a message. And this way, there are some very interesting interactions between learners of a language and advanced speakers or native speakers of the language that you're learning. And so I wanted to find out how our learners felt about these 3 exercise types and whether they thought they were actually useful. So we had a questionnaire. There were 9 questions in total. I wanted to do both quantitative and qualitative investigation to get more details about what they were actually thinking. So for each section, for each exercise, there were 2 closed-ended and 1 open-ended question to get more details about what it was. We used SurveyMonkey and an intercom message. That means that we were able to send an in-the-app message to all of our learners and ask them to complete the survey so that we can target a lot of users. And finally, we had almost 1,700 people participated. So it was a good pool of learners that participated in the research. We analyzed both quantitative data with descriptive statistic methods and qualitative data with in two phases. So first, so the user ID was attributed to each user. Each answer was coded to cluster information and discover patterns in the different responses. And then the second phase, broader categories were thought. So to check the frequency of responses, and that way we could draw conclusions. Now, what did we discover? The general outcomes were really, really positive. I had not expected that much positive reaction. But so to have a look at the first research question, which was how helpful do learners believe speaking activities are? Now, when we look at the speech recognition, see that most participants said that they agreed and strongly agreed that they were helpful. Same for the conversation exercise. So again, biggest chunk of users said they thought it was useful. And the same for the community corrections. Great results, really happy, but we had to also analyze the qualitative data to get more insights. Now, something that stood out from the feedback we got was that the speech recognition exercise was sometimes lacking because they are not always accurate. So technological issues with certain versions of the app could undermine in what extent they found them useful. Of course, if you say a sentence and the system, and you know it's right and the system says it's wrong, it's very demotivating. The conversation and community corrections were considered very helpful because that's of course the exercise that allows for interaction with other people, which is something that people wanted more of, and because they believe that these interactions were the most effective. Now, I'll move on to the second research question, which was about how much do they enjoy those speaking activities. Speech recognition scored really high. Again, strongly agree were the biggest group. Same for conversation exercises. So overall, very positive results. And the same also for community correction. Again, this is great results. Okay, yeah, it's working, yeah, amazing. But of course, we needed to investigate the qualitative data. Again, speech recognition, lack of accuracy, people were really frustrated. So even though they maybe gave a very high score, they did comment on how it was sometimes very frustrating for them to use it. And sometimes they just wanted to skip it because they didn't feel like it could give accurate feedback to them. About the conversations and the community exercises, they like it, but some find it very scary to receive feedback from strangers. They might, if they're a brand new beginner of a language, they didn't feel very comfortable to actually record themselves and send it to people that they didn't know. And I explained before how there is a community of language learners and language speakers, but for example, you can imagine we have English speaking users, but we have a far bigger English learning community. So there is not always a match. So some people will not receive enough feedback. So they might send a community exercise, but they might not always receive feedback, which they also find very demotivating. Because if you give feedback to people, you expect feedback back from other people. That's how the community works. Now, whether there is a significant difference between different types of speaking activities, I can be short. Not really. There is a very small difference if you look at the mean of the difference in perceived effectiveness. The conversation exercise scored slightly higher. So that was considered the most effective, let's say. But yeah, again, there's only a tiny difference. And the difference in perceived fun is interesting because they also score highly, but the user feedback, so the community feedback, actually scored a tiny bit higher. So yeah, so there was a lot of information there for us to have a look at and to think about how speaking could be made better, because there are a lot of shortcomings, even though it's great news that our learners like speaking practice with an application and they use it to improve their confidence in speaking. But yeah, there are things to work on, and that is what we are doing at the moment. Yeah. So one of the issues I mentioned earlier was that when you use a community, you don't always get an answer. So what we're experimenting at the moment, and hopefully in the future we can share more results of that as well, is an AI correction bot. So if a learner does not receive an answer from a human, let's say, a real learner, within, I think that it's set to 24 or 48 hours, they will see the correction from an AI bot. So that will give feedback like, this is excellent, if it's perfect, or if there are mistakes, they will give feedback on spelling mistakes or grammatical mistakes. And from what we've seen so far is that learners engage with the bots by giving them like a thumbs up and giving them like, yeah, this is the best correction I've received, or they write comments on what the bot says. So this is something we're investigating. Another issue that we're trying to tackle is the speech recognition exercise. We are aware that there are issues with the current or the technology we had, but we are working on improving that with the help of AI. So with AI, with language learning models, we are able to provide clear, be more useful and specific feedback on what a student has said. And this feedback is generated by AI technology. That will also give the learner the ability to listen to what they recorded versus the native speakers recording and to contrast. And then with the feedback, they can actually improve what they're saying. And this is also something we're working on now. This will be, further developed in the next couple of months. So to conclude, we found that language learners consider speaking activities both helpful and motivating. But of course, we need to make some adjustment and improvements, especially because speaking is such an important part of language learning and using a new language that you are learning. There were some limitations, obviously, to the study because we investigated what students think of speaking skills, but I would love to further investigate in the future whether they actually improve their speaking skills when they use our application. So that is one of the future lines of research, which I hope to, in the next couple of months or years, be able to investigate together with my research colleagues. And that was it. That was a great presentation. So if there are any questions.
Any questions for